Good afternoon and happy day to everyone present here. It is my honor to welcome you all to the first endowment lecture in memory of the late Shri K. SUBRAMANIAN, former Joint Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. This event is a joint initiative by the Chennai Center of China Studies and M.O.P. Vaishav College for Women. The endowment lecture, titled Potential Impacts of the New U.S. Administration on the Indian Economy, will be delivered by the esteemed Dr. S. Narayan, retired IAS officer, former Union Finance Secretary, and former Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of India. We would like to start this prestigious event with the invocation song. I kindly request everyone to rise.
गणनाथं लम्बोदरं एकदन्तमुपास्महे दीननाथ दयानिधे वक्रतुण्डमुपास्महे सुन्दर विनायका एकदन्तमुपास्महे गणनाथं लम्बोदरं एकदन्तमुपास्महे पार्वतीसुत पाहि मां दयाकर करुणाकर सर्वविघ्न विनाशका एकदन्तमुपास्महे गणनाथं लम्बोदरं एकदन्तमुपास्महे एकदन्तमुपास्महे.
Thank you. Please be seated. To formally begin our program, I invite Dr. Sumangala Devi, Vice Principal of M.O.P. Vaishav College, to deliver the welcome address.
Esteemed Chief Guest, Dr. S. Narayan IAS, Guests of Honor, Shri M.R. Shivaraman IAS Retired, Commodore R.S. Vasan, Special Guests, Faculty, and my dear students, a happy day to each one of you here. It's my pleasure to welcome each one of you to this august gathering on behalf of M.O.P. Vaishav College for Women. Our college is a leading institution focused on empowering women through quality education. Established in 1992, it is known for academic excellence, innovation, and holistic development. The college prepares students to excel in a dynamic global environment. Chennai Center for China Studies is the only think tank based away from Delhi that carries out a focused study of China and related dynamics in South Asia. We are thrilled to collaborate with the Chennai Center for China Studies on this significant initiative. This partnership reflects a shared vision to encourage meaningful dialogue on global economic and policy issues. I deem it an honor to welcome our Chief Guest, Dr. S. Narayan, to this platform to foster intellectual engagement aligning with our commitment to academic excellence. It is my privilege to welcome the guests of honor, Shri M.R. Shivaraman and Commodore R.S. Vasan, to this event of prominence. I also extend a warm welcome to all the special guests, faculty, and my dear students to this prestigious event. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, ma'am, for the warm welcome. Next, we move to the felicitation of our distinct guest speaker. I invite Dr. Sumangala Devi ma'am, Vice Principal of M.O.P. Vaishav College from M.O.P. Vaishav, to kindly felicitate our guest speaker, Commodore R.S. Vasan, retired officer of Indian Navy. Next, I would like to welcome Shri M.R. Shivaraman. Next, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. S. Narayan. Thank you, ma'am. To deliver the opening remarks, I invite Commodore R. Vasan, retired officer of the Indian Navy, Director General of Chennai Center of China Studies and Regional Director of National Maritime Foundation, Chennai Chapter. A few words about the speaker. He served over 34 years in the Navy and Coast Guard, commanding warships, air stations and maritime air squadron. He participated in the 1971 war and IPKF operations. The former regional commander of the Indian Coast Guard, specializing in maritime security, pollution prevention and anti-piracy. We are delighted to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I think it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be sharing the dais with such distinguished personalities, namely Dr. S. Narayan, who was not only the financial advisor to the Government of India, but also the Finance Secretary. And likewise, Mr. Shivaraman, who is a constant supporter of C3S, has also been the Revenue Secretary and also has represented India in United Nations and other places. This is a very important occasion for us. As was brought out, we have been doing programs with M.O.P. Vaishav, and this is one such initiative. And thanks to Mrs. Satyabama, so when we discussed this issue of recognizing the contributions made by Mr. SUBRAMANIAN, it was her idea to say, why do not we have a proper endowment lecture? And Chennai Center for China Studies readily accepted this because we deemed it an honor to take on this task of conducting the endowmental lecture annually. As far as Mr. Subramanian is concerned, I want to tell all of you that he was one of the founding members of Chennai Center for China Studies and also the treasurer. Dr. Narayan himself, while sitting down below, we were talking about the stalwarts who are with us and who are no more with us. And the list starts with Mr. B.S. Raghavan, Rajan, the founding director, then Mr. Raman, who was the president, then PNG Subramanian, who was the consul general in Shanghai, and then of course Mr. Subramanian, who is no more with us. So, the contributions have been enormous, not just to Chennai Center for China Studies, where he was a member as well as the founding treasurer, but also to the intellectual community. In fact, the other day when our research officers went to the house of Mr. Subramanian, Mrs. Satyabama gave us all the collections that he's made over the decades of his study. It was so methodical. I think the only other person I've seen who is as methodical is Mr. Surya Narayan, who is sitting here. Where all the references are taken out, they are flagged, they are pasted, they write down what exactly is it all about, put it in a folder, segregated subject-wise. I don't think the present day lot have that kind of a patience because everything is available on a fingertip. But there's a kind of intensity that he showed in trying to understand any topic, and notably economics, because he was, after all, a dynamic figure in the Ministry of Economics, and he was a joint secretary. And I think Professor Sunarayan, when he wrote about him, when he passed away, recounted one incident, an anecdote, which tells you what the man stood for. Apparently, a movie called Sangam, I don't know how many of you know about this, Raj Kapoor's film, was being made. And those days, foreign exchange came at a price, literally and figuratively. So he needed foreign exchange clearances. And apparently, Mr. Raj Kapoor, came to Delhi, and he was staying in a 5-star hotel. And he rang up Mr. Subramanian and said, why don't you come and have a drink with me this evening? So, as is expected, Mr. Subramanian frankly told him, if it's got anything to do with your foreign exchange, please come and see me tomorrow in the office. So he came next day, and apparently there were certain issues related to the foreign exchange. And, the amount that he asked for was not given. So later on, I think it's Professor Sunarayan who recounted that in the acknowledgements in the film, the acknowledgement is made, guess who? To Haji Mastan. Because apparently, after the refusal by the government of India for this foreign exchange, he went to Haji Mastan, and maybe he was not as exposed as he is today. So his name was put in the acknowledgements of financial help that was given. So that's what he stood for, values, and that he imbibed. And in fact, he guided many of our interns. He made it a point to go through their documents, and many of them are published works today of C3S. So we gratefully acknowledge the contribution made by Mr. Subramanian, and I am very personally happy that two stalwarts here, who are authorities in economics and governance, are with us today to tell the young students. I am also happy to see a large crowd. I believe there are about 70, 80 of you who are here. You are going to greatly benefit from this, because everyone is not now talking about Trump 2.0. What will happen? So I'm not going to talk much about it, because I have my own views about Mr. Trump, like all of you have. But I'll leave it to the guest of honor and the speaker today, main speaker, Mr. Narayan, to talk about it. There are huge expectations on how there would be great amount of disarray perhaps, and also a certain amount of destabilization in many areas. But that's something that we'll discuss later. So I must also thank Dr. Narayan, who was my former boss. We are together in ORF. Thereafter, he asked me to take over the Center for Asia Studies and run it. And so our association goes back decades. And I have learned a lot from his personal example, integrity, and the knowledge base that he has. Likewise, Mr. Shivaraman, who continues to be engaged with us on a day-to-day basis. The moment a China Watch goes out today, which is a fortnightly publication, which I recommend you all have a look, he immediately makes it a point to say, but how about this point? This has not been covered, or this has been covered well. So no, that is the way our researchers have been guided. So I'm grateful to you. Our promise to you, madam, is that we'll ensure that such quality speakers are always brought here, and we'll move out to different institutions, because the idea is to reach out to the youth of this country and not go for only some captivated audience. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure, and thanks to M.O.P. Vaishav for accepting this request to join hands with you, and we'll continue to do this as long as we can reach out to the student community. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Commodore R.S. Vasan, for the introduction. It is now time for the presidential address. I am honored to welcome Shri M.R. Shivaraman. A few words about him. He is the former Revenue Secretary of India and Executive Director at IMF. He advocated for PPP-based GDP and UNSC reforms for counter-terrorism. He played a significant role in advancing technology and commerce policies related to China and Asia. We are honored to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Satyabama Subramanian, Vice Principal of Vaishnavi College, Dr. Narayan, one of my very able successors in the same department, Commodore Vasan, ladies and gentlemen. I consider it a privilege and an honor to preside over this memorial lecture dedicated to K. Subramaniam, whose memory we cherish. I came into contact with Mr. Subramaniam in October 1978, long way back, when I joined the Department of Economic Affairs as director in charge of promoting economic relations between the then EEC countries. Mr. Subramaniam was my next door neighbor in the North Block. He was dealing with investment, a very difficult subject, because in those days there was a lot of nationalization going on. He was involved in fixation of share prices, takeover of companies, and investment of Government of India. So, and Mr. Subramanian, I was quite familiar with the way in which Secretariat functioned, but not the Central Secretariat. Of course, the labyrinths are more difficult to navigate there than in the state government. Otherwise, the function is the same. Mr. Subramaniam, I saw, was an extraordinarily meticulous person. Not only that, his knowledge of economics was quite profound, particularly in the job in which he was engaged in, particularly in regard to fixation of share prices, studying the markets, take over a company's Government of India investments. So it required a lot of research and analysis and also a lot of thinking. Mr. Subramanian always typed his own notes, and he was a master of the English language, and nobody could fault him as anything that he wrote and filed. Secondly, he was so thorough with the subject that he would never send a file to the Joint Secretary, Mr. Ganeshan. Later on, Mr. Ganeshan became my secretary. And Mr. Ganeshan used to tell me that he didn't have to touch a word of what Mr. Subramanian wrote. And that was the case with the secretaries also. Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Mr. R.N. Malhotra was our additional secretary. Mr. R.N. Malhotra and I belonged to the same cadre. And I occupied all the posts which Mr. Malhotra occupied since he entered service, excepting the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. So Mr. Malhotra used to tell me a lot about Mr. Subramanian and what his capacity was. Mr. Subramanian was, of course, in his thinking and ideology, left of the center. And after a few months, I moved over as Joint Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs. Mr. Subramanian left the department. He joined the Department of Company Affairs. We lost touch with each other. The second time I met him was in the C3 after I came back wandering all over the world and returned to Chennai to spend my retired life. So we used to exchange a lot of emails. I don't know whether Mrs. Satyabama had an occasion to see those emails. Some of them were very bitter, extremely violent, I must say, in terms of ideological thinking. He just did not like the present government and some of its thinking. Of course, I also did not like many of it, but some I supported. So there was a lot of quarrel between both of us. And at times we used to part company. We used to say, yeah, we are not going to talk anymore with each other. But within a few days, we were back again. That shows a lot for Mr. Subramanian's attitude towards people. He was a man of absolute integrity, total integrity and transparency. There was nothing he hid from anybody else, the way in which he thought, the way in which he wrote, everything. And I always wonder that people like Mr. Subramanian, who also wrote the IAS, incidentally he also wrote the IAS and marginally probably he couldn't get in. So I don't know whether, yes, of course the IAS lost the services of a great person. He would have been probably a very important secretary in Government of India. And it is very strange that the way in which our entire bureaucratic setup functions, merit has a subordinate role in regard to promotions, in regard to postings of people. It's always various other considerations to which service you belong to, IAS, IPS, IRS or whatever it is. Of course, things have changed a little bit. But I always found, whether it was the state government or the central government, merit always had a subordinate role to play. And that's one of the reasons why India is not growing at 10% per annum. If only merit were to play a role in the selection of people for particular jobs and posts, certainly would grow at not less than 10%. That is my firm opinion. And unfortunately, Mr. Subramanian, of course, he retired as Joint Secretary. Some of his colleagues, at least I know one or two of them, who retired as additional secretaries also. It's a question of age also. If you enter service at a later age, then probably you won't be able to make it. And the way in which the secretariat function was like this, that notes used to come up from the bottom. Narayanan is very much aware of it. And it traveled through the various levels. Government of India tried to reduce the number of levels, but it has remained the same. And the contribution of the Director Deputy Secretary was very significant in terms of analysis of the facts which came from both for decision making at a higher levels. And in the case of Subramanian's notes, nobody had to look into anything else because everything was there, cooked and ready for anybody to take a decision. So in regard to the people who functioned in the secretariat, he was outstanding. Outstanding in the sense there was no match for him either in the IAS or in any other service as far as analytical ability and the application of theory to practical problems is concerned. And that I found him in many of his writings, many of his exchange of notes, etc., his review of books, many of them he had done. In everything he applied theory to a practical problem. That is the beauty of Mr. Subramanian. But unfortunately, Mr. Subramanian he laid buried in the dark shadows of the bureaucracy. I would like to conclude just quoting Thomas Gray. I think some of you at least would have known about Thomas Gray, his elegy, famous poem. Large was his bounty and his soul sincere. I think all of us who know Subramanian will agree with me on this. Large was his bounty and his soul sincere. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bare. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness in the desert air, fragrance in the desert air. May Mr. Subramanian smile on us and guide us. I hope his memory will remain very, very long time, at least till I last. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shri M.R. Shivaraman, for sharing your valuable thoughts. We now proceed to the most awaited segment of today's program, the Endowment Lecture. It will be delivered by our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. S. Narayan, on the topic Potential Impacts of the New U.S. Administration on the Indian Economy.
Commodore Vasan, my respected senior M.R. Shivaraman ji, Vice Principal, Ms. Satyabama, it's a great honor to be here. Not just because of the personality that this lecture is entitled, Mr. Subramanian, but as Mr. Shivaraman so wonderfully explained, the kind of person he was, the attention he brought to his work, his meticulousness, and indeed his very deep knowledge about everything that he put his hand to. I first encountered him in a very peculiar circumstance. In 1971, I had taken study leave to go to Australia to do a Master of Business Administration, and I was told that a small amount of $50 was available for students abroad. So I went and asked him. So he looked at me, he asked me, he was Under Secretary then, dealing with foreign exchange. So why are you going? Don't you have a good job in Chennai? I said, sir, I just want a little bit of anxiousness to study a little more. And he very graciously gave me $50 at that particular time. And I remember that people are surprised. You got $50 out of Subramanian? Normally he doesn't do it, as I said. So that was 71. Afterwards, in many different avatars, I have encountered him. But much more lately, in the C3S, I could see the amount of commitment, knowledge, attention, and the kind of involvement that he had with the organization, with every one of its events and functions. So it's indeed a very great privilege and a pleasure for me to be here, and a great honor. I was given a list of topics to choose from, and one or two of the topics I found a little bit heavy and theoretical. So I gave the excuse saying that maybe it's not good enough for the students, but actually the problem was that maybe it was too theoretical for me to talk about. So the problem is on my side and not on theirs. What I would like to share is a kind of my view. Other views may differ. My view of the world picture of the kind of economic development that is likely to happen. Particularly, we are looking at 2025. and 2026, not just with the new Trump administration in the United States, but also with the kind of effects that it is having on China, the kind of problems that China is facing currently, and the kind of options that are available for these countries, and how it is going to affect the Indian economy. So very, very briefly, to take a picture about where we are standing now, a snapshot, and then we will look at the larger picture. India is growing well. Southern states are growing immensely well. It is growing well. A number of 6%, 7% is bandied about, which is very good, much higher than any other country. But if we look around, we see some advantages and some limitations. Let us look at the limitations. In spite of a lot of money that government has poured into incentivizing private investment, especially through production-linked incentive schemes and through many other subsidies. If you want to set up a semiconductor factory today in Gujarat, you get nearly 80% subsidy. In spite of all that, private investment has not come up to the expectation of government, and therefore the amount of public investment, public capital investment, has been at a very high level. Last year, capital formation, especially in infrastructure through government money, was extremely high. This year, because of the first quarter, the election quarter, it was low. It has picked up enormously in the second quarter, but it will not be able to catch up the kind of expenditure that happened in the last year, because you lost a whole quarter, and infrastructure funding takes a little bit of runway, a long runway before it can take off. So therefore, there is a limitation. Once the private investment does not take place adequately, there are only few opportunities. Okay, what happens is then capital formation reduces. Capital formation reduces, which means that, okay, employment reduces with all the attendant problems. However much government may push, this is going to be a limitation for the coming year. And therefore, you see states trying to do different things. When private capital formation of Indian industry is not happening, you see every state trying to woo a foreign investor, going to Taiwan to bring in somebody, Japan to bring in somebody, Korea to bring in somebody, etc., hoping that these external investors will in fact replace the kind of capital investment that was missing from the local entrepreneurs. And I'll come to why this is missing, why the local entrepreneur is not investing. As a result, you see states, particularly Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, all these southern states, particularly Maharashtra, Gujarat, all scrambling for investments from overseas, and you have all these big ceremonies and functions for bringing in people for MOUs, etc. The other problem is certainly prices are rising. Inflation in the whole of India is controlled, as you have already seen, by 5 commodities: potatoes, onions, tomato, gold, silver. These 5 determine the average life of an average middle class Indian. Irrespective of what the Reserve Bank may say, irrespective of what the government may say, so long as these 5 commodities are not under control, the middle class and the salaried middle class is under stress. And you can see this stress everywhere today. You can see the stress that people are tightening. People are not spending. Consumer spending is not rising. It is rising, but not rising at the level it was rising 2 years ago or 1 year ago. It is not rising. If it is not rising, and its inflation is defined by these 5 parameters, then in case the salary hikes that are happening are just able to make these people continue at the levels they are. So this middle class stress is something that we have to recognize, and this stress will continue whole of this year, whole of next year. Okay, tomato prices have fallen, onion prices have gone up. Potato yield is good in some areas, not good in some areas. Gold is high, it came down, now people are replacing silver for gold, so silver prices have gone up to 106 rupees. So this is inflation. Indian inflation is nothing to do with 5 commodities. So where is the growth coming from then? Where is the 6.5%? Where is the 7% coming from? It is coming from just 2 major factors. One major factor is the huge internal remittances that we are now getting. People who are illegally immigrating, legally immigrating, etc., whatever you call it. 116 billion last year, far higher than the next. Next is about 90 billion, 92 billion, next country. This is the money that is coming into the country. 116 billion. The second is services export. The entire IT infrastructure, the entire service sector, the technology sector, and this is because the other countries are getting more costly, it is coming here. Services exports are now crossing about 100 billion, 110, 120 billion. These 2 inflows are keeping this economy afloat, not necessarily the kind of runway that we should have if we had private capital formation and private generation of employment. Okay? So the moment we talk about these external factors, immediately we have to link up with what is happening in other countries, and therefore in the next 2 years, whether this situation will improve, will be work against us, or will not work in favor of us. So let us pick up 2. Let us pick up what Mr. Trump is saying now. What he is saying is, at the moment, whether he will be able to do it is a picture we will have to see a little further down. What he is saying is that he is going to raise tariff. Particularly, he is going to raise tariffs against China, especially against EVs and all that. He is going to raise it up to 60%. He is saying that Mexico will not become a source of backdoor entry into the United States, though he will have some curbs on imports from tariff or non-tariff curbs from imports into US. He is going to cut down very sharp on immigration, especially H-1B visas, especially people illegal immigration, etc. He is going to send them back. And definitely he sees China as a potential, I would say, economic threat, technological threat as well as an economic threat. If we turn our attention on the other side to what is happening in China, certainly a lot of people who have invested in real estate have lost enormously. There are several 100,000 apartments where people have invested who have not got their completion or money back. So there is stress. There is some level of, therefore, discontent among the younger lot who have lost this money. And therefore, it is very fashionable for I would use the Western liberal media to say, oh, China is in a serious debt trap, it can never come out of it, it's in a serious problem, etc. Personally, I don't think so. Because if real estate is really the problem, just think about it. Real estate valuations have gone up in the last 20 years in China as much as they have gone up in India. What was a ground of land about 20 years ago, and you compare it to here, it will be maybe 10 times, 20 times. And it's the same valuation there. But the big difference is, here the increase in valuation pinches the individual, whereas there the increase in valuation does not. Why? Because at the beginning of the story, the land was not private land. It was all government land. So it is government land which is now valued at a particular number. And therefore, the growth in terms of the inflationary impact, or if you put it on the other side of the coin, in terms of the debt impact on the government, because government was the owner of the land in any case, the debt impact on the owner is something that the government can sustain. Here it will fall on the heads of the individuals, on the banks, on the private banks. There it will fall back on the government, which is why you are seeing the kind of incentivization or which the Chinese government is now doing in order to reinflate the economy. So though you read about Chinese debt problem, in my personal opinion, that this is not something that you need to worry about very much. So you come back and say, therefore, the Chinese economy is stable. Maybe it's not growing as fast as it was in the last 8 to 10 years, but it's stable. It'll grow. It'll come out of this debt crisis fairly comfortably. And therefore, if they are faced with this kind of tariff, with this kind of wall of tariff, then they have to take options, because they cannot allow hundreds of thousands of small businesses which are depending on the large businesses, which are then depending on the US and other markets. They cannot allow the hundreds of thousands of small markets to close down. So they have, in a way, to my mind, they have in a way only two options. I can be fairly open here. They have in a way only two options. One option is to move manufacturing down to other countries where there are no tariff barriers from the United States. For example, they can move to Vietnam, they can move to Malaysia, they can move to Southeast Asia, any of the countries in Southeast Asia. They can move to parts of Latin America, etc., where there is no, and therefore find a backdoor entry into the United States. Now, this is something which can be easily stopped if Mr. Trump wants to, because if he brings in a condition saying that you must have a 40% value addition within the country, then the Chinese companies will be either forced to manufacture in the United States or to provide value addition in the United States, or they would have to restrict their imports and exports and find a market for these exports in other countries. Now, if you find a market for these exports in other countries, that means other countries are going to be flooded with Chinese goods. And if they are flooded with Chinese goods, naturally Indian goods or the local goods will not find it competitive, which is actually the primary reason why the private sector in India is not really investing. Because they are really worried about huge influx of Chinese goods, which can come in equally good quality, good opportunity to come in. And therefore, putting money into fresh investment here is going to be counterproductive for these people. There is, of course, a much bigger second option that China has, which I can share here, which is again public knowledge. 92% of all these semiconductors are today coming out of Taiwan. So China has an option, and that option is war. And that option is war against Taiwan. All that they have to do is to declare war against Taiwan, and the US will be forced to negotiate commercial terms, purely commercial. What will you do? Allow our products in? Reduce tariffs? Don't make life so difficult for us. So if I were sitting, if you are sitting on a Chinese desk, you look at these two options and say, which is least harmful for me? And let me choose that kind of an option. So I won't rule that option out also. Which is why you are seeing so much activity in the Pacific Ocean now. So much extra activity in the last few months. How would I handle it if I were in the US administration? Very, very simply. I would say green cards to all Taiwanese semiconductor professionals if you come over to the US and build up my Arizona plant. All right? This is a counter. It's a constant game of one-upmanship, constant game of outthinking the other. And therefore, we sit back in India and say, how is it going to affect us? What is going to happen? And so let us look at the pluses and the minuses. The pluses are, Mr. Trump is going to insist that several of the US companies who are manufacturing out of China should stop manufacturing out of China. So which means that they have to find other places. So great opportunity for India to identify those US companies which are currently supplying to the US market by manufacturing out of China, to give them incentives to bring them here and make this an alternative. It is not for India alone. This is valid for Sri Lanka, Myanmar can do it, Cambodia can do it, anybody can do it. But you have to provide an attractive floor. So there's a great opportunity for India. The second more important opportunity which will arise is really if immigration and even the higher quality immigration is going to go down, then a lot of work that is being done in the US, I would say 60 to 70% of US industry, US technology, US financial services, US banking depends on software and development which is happening in India. Therefore, the opportunity for India to grow and multiply its services sector multifold, going into greater opportunities with the United States, is so much more. So, in many ways, and if Mr. Trump also follows through on his another thing he has been drawing, he's a drill baby drill. That means if he is going to really increase the overall production of oil in the world, I think it's going to be very good for India. So however we look at it, Trump administration is likely to be, we'll have to see, okay? And we are talking in November. He's not even there until January. How much of his promise is rhetoric? How much of his promise is going to be real? How much of, like all our election promises, How much of it actually happens, we'll have to see a few years down the line. But currently, looking at it from this point of view, there seems to be a bit of a bright light. And there is also, therefore, the bright light, you can see what is happening right in front of your eyes. For us to take advantage of the Chinese worry about what is going to happen in America, to be able to bring a closer relationship with China, especially in terms of technology, in terms of investment, to bring Chinese products, actually ask Chinese to invest here. Because then that will have given them a window and an opportunity to access the US market, as well as to supply Indian market, as well as to provide competition for Indian industry, which is not really investing. Government is a little bit fed up with Indian industry for not investing. Which is why you see in the last 1 week or so, a subtle or a not so subtle change in the India-China relations, especially in terms of trade and connectivity. Okay, so that has been a fairly long story. I think this story is an endless story, it can go on. But I think I will kind of call a halt to that, because there are so many ramifications, so many small pathways that this story will take. But I'll make an end by saying thank you very much once more for having me here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Narayan, for your enlightening and thought-provoking lecture. Now I request Commodore R.S. Vasan to felicitate our esteemed guest speaker, Shri M.R. Shivaraman and Dr. S. Narayan. And the Vice Principal, Sumangla Devi.
Thank you for dealing with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Just also want to acknowledge the presence of friends from foreign countries, from Taiwan, Russia. So we are very happy that they are also here to listen to this lecture.
Thank you, sir. To conclude this memorable event, I invite Ms. Sapna Elsa Abram, Senior Research Officer at Chennai Center of China Studies, to deliver the vote of thanks.
It's only an opinion.
It could be thrown open for some questions from the students, not from the adults. Only from students.
Do the students have any questions?
Yeah, students can ask. Sir, only for students first, after that we- All of us are. Go ahead, sir. Still go ahead.
That goes back.
Please use the mic so I can hear.
Balance of trade, India-China, is so much in favor of China. How do we reduce the imports from China? The one is that the sort of imports that we have, communication equipments. This also has serious security implications also. The United States has one advantage. They're likely to invest a lot in defense production. And many of us still, though we are trying to diversify our arms purchases, both India and Pakistan are dependent on the United States in a big way. So to keep the two countries at loggerheads or at war with one another is a US aim. I shall stop.
Firstly, to expect a country, any country, to have an equitable balance of trade with every country it is dealing with is not possible, not required. If you look at the larger picture, China is about 70 billion to us and we are about 15-16 billion to them. There are only two ways in which this can be reduced. One way is if there are alternate suppliers, and alternate suppliers really will have to come out of Southeast Asia. Maybe Taiwan, Vietnam and Malaysia come to my mind because of logistics, proximity, time of delivery, etc. But it is very unlikely that it will be able to be reduced in a significant way in the short term. The other way is what the government is trying to do, to make that Chinese manufacture happen here in India, in which case you will have local employment, you will have local value addition, and in which case the export-import balance will get addressed. Let us also understand, okay, in this forum one can be open. Let us also understand that the United States is not unaware of the very fine balancing game that India has been playing in the last 2 or 3 years. And therefore, while United States needs India for, I would say, technological reasons, but at the same time they would be putting a squeeze on India, which they are doing in many, many different, I don't want to get into that, in many different ways. So as I said, it is a continuous game. There are no end points in this game. It's a continuous rolling game. But this is what the government is trying for the present.
Any other questions? Please. Please use the mic so that the others can hear you.
So you had mentioned that the tariffs of the US on China would make it difficult for China to find markets. Now you said that India would be take advantage of it. But I want to ask you, do we have the kind of ecosystem in India to manufacture kind of goods, both in terms of quality and in terms of price? In terms of the engineering infrastructure, whether it be semiconductors or any other thing. And added to this, I just want to make a small point here that over the years, the scientific temper that is necessary for innovation and technology, advancement of technology, I think the scientific temper, if it doesn't exist largely in our population, that may lead us to slide backward. Of course, we may copy the designs of other countries and come up to some level of expertise and quality that is accepted worldwide. But even if Chinese goods are stopped by tariffs, as you mentioned, do we have the current infrastructure and the kind of ecosystem to manufacture the goods at the same cost and the same quality?
The great advantage of being in India is that constantly we are self-criticizing us, everybody. So this is something, it is very good because we learn from our own criticisms. But ecosystem and this, how are we exporting Apple phones? If Tata can do it, and there are close to 18 or 20 semiconductor fab units coming up with government supports. Why would people be putting close to, altogether it comes to something like about 12 to 14 billion dollars. They are all Indian companies. Only about 4 or 5 are foreign companies. Here, if we did not have an ecosystem. You take Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu accounts for about 22% of all the electronics exports of the whole country. You look at the pattern of exports, the pattern of exports has changed from going for, I would say, primary goods to secondary and manufactured goods. And more high value goods are going out of India. Please look at trade as a percentage of GDP or even exports at a percentage of GDP in the last 15 to 20 years, and you will see the jump has been happening in the manufactured goods and in the value addition goods, excluding the services. So it's there. Whether you make use of it, take advantages of it, not, is in our hands.
I'll just add a couple of points to his query. If we had not had the ecosystem, why would foreign company giants come here and set up global capability centers here? Only yesterday, Karnataka government has announced a major policy to attract more capability centers. And all these centers are manned by engineers and scientists. And they develop all the products. And they develop the engineering skills or the designs, etc. And they go out of India. The amount of work that is being done by Indian engineers, you talk about the ecosystem in China is vastly different from the ecosystem in India. Narayanan referred to it primarily land. Land was given almost free to the Apple company when they established. There were 1 million workers only in Apple companies. The land was given free. And whenever they had a labor problem, the apprentices working in technical institutions were forced to work in the Apple company and other companies there at very low wages. Now the kind of system they have, we don't have that system. Ours is a democratic country where people are free. And ours is a country where unions are formed. Therefore, you cannot ever compare the production technologies here, the production systems here with China. As Narayanan pointed out, even then, we have been able to export up to now $12 billion worth of Apple iPhones have been exported out of India. And the current year is going to be probably end with about $18 billion of iPhone exports within the matter of 2 to 3 years. So for the ecosystem is there. The only thing is the management system will have to undergo some kind of change if we are to get into that kind of a competitive mode.
One last question. Any student?
Any more questions? Thank you for your valuable insights. To conclude this memorable event, I invite Ms. Sapna Elsa Abraham, Senior Research Officer at Chennai Center for China Studies, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It is my privilege to deliver the vote of thanks for today's enlightening session of the K. Subramanian Endowment Lecture, titled Potential Impacts of the New U.S. Administration on the Indian Economy. First and foremost, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Dr. S. Narayan IAS, former Union Finance Secretary and Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of India, for sharing his profound insights for such a timely and important subject. Your vast experience and thought-provoking analysis have enriched us all. I would also like to thank Shri M.R. Shivaraman, IAS, former Revenue Secretary, Government of India, and Executive Director, IMF, for presiding over this event. Your presence has added immense value to the lecture and exemplifies the importance of this platform. A special note of gratitude goes to Mrs. Satyabhama Subramanian, the wife of Shri K. Subramanian, for her unwavering support and active involvement in organizing this lecture. Your dedication ensures that Shri Subramanian's legacy continues to inspire us all. We also thank the family members of K. Subramanian sir for honoring with your presence here today. Our sincere thanks to M.O.P. Vice Principal Subbalakshmi Devi ma'am for being present here and delivering the welcome address, and the Department of Economics and the students of M.O.P. Vaishav College for their enthusiastic participation and collaboration in making this event a success. Sincere thanks to Professor Kiran Verma, HOD, Department of Economics, and Professor Seema for all the support and coordination. We are equally grateful to the strategic community of Chennai and the distinguished members of the Chennai Center for China Studies for their continued support and engagement. Your presence reflects the importance of fostering intellectual dialogue on critical global issues. Finally, a warm thank you to everyone who joined us today, both in person and virtually. Your presence and interest make events like this meaningful and impactful. Thank you, and we look forward to your continued support for future endeavors.
Thank you, Ms. Sapna. I now request the audience to raise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Thank you, everyone. I request the students to wait till the dignitaries leave the room. I request the students to maintain silence.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you, sir. Okay, sir. I'm not able to cover. Okay.